Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to the Birchfield Penny Arts Center's monthly book club. And we do meet monthly, starting way back in 2011, when one of our docents thought it would be a good idea to read those books that Mr. Birchfield read. And that's how we launched our book club. Now, of course, because there are so many authors in our region for whom we owe the opportunity to share their work, we pivoted to reading books written by people who were either born or bred in Buffalo or spent some time here. Thus far, we have hosted over 100 authors through the years. And tonight, we're really delighted to have Judith Ferrara come, whom I thought might be my cousin, but as it turns out, she wasn't. Although she now lives in Worcester, Massachusetts, Judith Ferrara was born on December 31st, Buffalo, New York. She went to high school at Mount St. Mary's and then earned an undergraduate degree right here on this campus at Buffalo State, now it's University, was college at the time, and then went on to get an advanced degree, a certificate of advanced graduate study. Did I say that correctly? At Fitchburg State University, and then a master's degree in secondary education. I think I said that a little wrong.
But yes, that's okay.
Yes, she went to Boston College.
Boston University.
First Boston University for that advanced degree and then on for the master's degree. And since that time, she has earned a PhD at the University of New Hampshire, taught for many years. Judith is a poet, an author, an artist, and an educator. Her work has appeared in multiple journals. She's a recipient of, and this is a very long title, Worcester Cultural Commission, Massachusetts Cultural Council Creative Arts Fellowship in 2003. And you won't be surprised when I share that in 2008, she received the Stanley Kuntz Medal from the Worcester County Poetry Association. So kindly join me in welcoming Judy. So glad to come.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks to the Zoomers. And for the sake of people who are on Zoom, who are in the Worcester area, we do pronounce it Worcester.
Worcester, thank you.
As in Worcestershire.
I should have asked that question before.
But everybody,
earlier.
Any telemarket, anybody I talk to for a credit card or anything, it's always Worcester.
Well, thank you so much for
this is a
sharing that.
Anyway, but I know I would get razzed when I got back. I know that for sure. So thank you, Mary, and
My pleasure.
And the Birchfield Penny Arts Center, and also the Worcester County Poetry Association for putting this event on their website. And congratulations to you all for being part of this community of readers. It takes effort. It takes someone to organize it. It takes a belief in reading widely. And the wonderful part of that is that it did start with Birchfield's own reading list. I think that's so inspirational and a wonderful thing, a legacy that you have right now here in this moment. I would like to, and by the way, 1964 is when I graduated from Buffalo State. So this is 61 years later, and here I am, and I'm very pleased, although I've been a member of the Birchfield Penny Arts Center. And in fact, I had my work exhibited here in the member show a few years back too. So, you know, this is a magnificent building and resource, and what a gift to art and reading. It's just a wonderful thing. What I'd like to do tonight is read and just discuss the book for about 40 minutes or so, and then we could open it up to comments and questions. All right, does that sound good for everybody? And I'll be reading from the book. I have a tape of Stanley Kunitz actually reading some of his poems that are central to what I'm talking about tonight. I could have let us hear 5 or 6 different poems that are really very basic to his story, his mother's story. But I chose 2 that were central to that. And so that's why this low tech, this is called the tape recorder. It has a tape in it, and it is not from some other technically advanced source. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to see how that works.
Probably better than our computer technologies working this evening.
Yeah, at this point. So if that sounds good for everybody, that's how we would proceed. All right, and we do have slides of the key points that I wanted to talk about tonight. And we look at Yetta. I fell in love with this picture of her. One of my 3 visits to the Princeton archives where Stanley Kunitz's papers are. And if you ever visit an archive, you know that the things are stored vertically in boxes that are lined up on a library shelf. His collection, his papers are 115 feet long. So Stanley saved everything, and we are the better for it. Because in my 3 visits, my 3 research visits there, I looked at different things. Sometimes I revisited different parts of the collection because I became very interested in his mother. 14 years ago, in 2009, I started doing the research, and the last of the 14 years, the last 7 were devoted to his mother. So I did revisit parts of the collection then. But coming across this, I thought, well, do you see what I might have thought, being an artist and an art lover? I thought of, oh, look, at kind of a Whistler's mother. And one little story to start with is when I shared this photograph with his Stanley Kunitz's only daughter, birth daughter in California, she sent me a picture back of that blanket, which she had received from, she didn't really know her grandmother died when she was only about 1 year old, so she really didn't know Yetta, but she was given that blanket. And so there it was, I had seen that and transmitted that picture to her, and here was the blanket. There were so many moments like that in these 14 years that really, I get chills even talking about them now. So, and in fact, I wanted that for the cover, but you know how things go with covers and titles. The title, A Feast of Losses, comes from one of my personal favorites of Stanley Kunitz's poetry, The Layers. Does anybody here know that poem, The Layers? It's just a wonderful poem, wonderful poem. And it goes, one of the lines, how shall the heart be reconciled to its feast of losses? And it's such a perfect title for this book, and a tribute to this woman, his mother, and all that she lost, and how she managed to stay in the game, in a sense, I suppose, for as long as she could. And if you've read the book, you know that the later writing that I was able to access, she did despair. And given her life, we can certainly understand. And you'll hear a little bit about that too tonight. So why should we even care about Yetta Jaspin Kunitz dying? Well, she had a famous son, and that's really how most people come to know her or even get interested in her, because she is represented in his poems in a very specific way. Jesus is represented as an unaffectionate, unforgiving mother in several of his poems. Now, her son's success as a poet is a given. If you know Stanley Kunitz's work at all, Pulitzer Prize, National Book Award, one of the few poets, twice Poet Laureate of the United States. She was a Lithuanian Jewish immigrant. She was a businesswoman in the days when businesswomen were uncommon. She came over from Lithuania with no skills. She was a shop girl as a child, as a young girl. And she emigrated from Lithuania to New York City, and in 3 years was able to pick up skills that enabled her to become, at certain times, a successful woman in the city of Worcester. And so that's kind of, she was born 1866. She died in 1952, to give you a little window of time. Stanley was born in 1905, but he died in 2006. And if you do the math right away, he was a few weeks away from his 101st birthday. And there is a film of him reading his poems. In fact, not this recording of it, but of the portrait 4 days before he passed away. He was a remarkable man. And so you can see why I would be engaged with this subject, Stanley Kunitz and his mother. And I'll tell a little bit more of how that happened. But that's why I think she's worth it, because she's represented one way in the work and in Kunitz's interviews. But this recovery of her original papers gives us a chance to have a, it's been called a meaningful corrective of her life. And it gives a much richer, fuller picture of Yetta. I like to compare it to, Matisse's line drawings, people. That's kind of what Kunitz did when he decided to represent his mother in that certain way. But now with this book and with the transcription of her original memoir and letters and diary, we get more of an Annie Leibovitz photograph. And you know how detailed and wonderful and what character shines out of every one of her subjects. So that's how I like to think of what's happened here. So let's listen, if we can, with all the technology issues and a massive storm outside. Let's hope this works. All right. Okay. Here we go.
That's right. My father for killing himself, especially at such an awkward time and in a public park that spring when I was waiting to be born. She locked his name in her deepest cabinet and would not let him out till I could hear him thumping. When I came down from the attic with the pastel portrait in my hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache and deep brown level eyes, she ripped it into shreds without a single word and slapped me hard. In my 64th year, I can feel my cheek still burning.
And there is the portrait. Okay. This is the portrait, and it actually is at Princeton, and it is a photograph. And in the day, they would pastel color the photographs, and that is Solomon Kunitz. And I would like to, here was another discovery at Princeton. When I looked in the folder, the poem, the portrait, and saw the different drafts of the poem. And sorry. We're going back. Okay. Let's look at there. It's 3 sentences. I think it's one of the most powerful poems I have ever read and heard him read. And I think that first line break is absolutely breathtaking. My mother never forgave my father. So you're expecting, well, they had an argument, whatever happened, and then for killing himself. I mean, it took my breath away the very first time I heard it. And if you're hearing that poem for the first time, I hope that you experience some feelings. And maybe some really strong feelings for the speaker of the poem. And since this is the story of Stanley Kunitz, it's his story. But let's look at the second sentence. She locked his name in her deepest cabinet and would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping. When I came down from the attic with the pastel portrait in my hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache and deep brown level eyes, she ripped it into shreds without a single word and slapped me hard, sobbing inconsolably. Those two words are not in the final draft. But as you just heard them, and thinking back to how you perceived the speaker and her, did you feel a shift toward him, but mostly toward her, if you hear the words inconsolably sobbing? That is the root of this book, is that this is art. The poet made art, and he made those decisions to represent her in this way. And that's what this whole book is about. She's speaking for herself now. And I think that's the great joy. So if we could go to the next slide. In the materials that Dr. Gretchen Kunitz mailed to me from California, when I asked her, did she have her grandmother's memoir? There was a set of 4 letters and the memoir and diary and a whole lot of documents. And this was the first letter. And this first letter really set up a lot of mismatches in my head, because what I knew and what everybody knew about Yetta was in this book, a 9-page, highly edited version of her memoir and diary. But this first letter, had all kinds of mismatches about the things when she wrote it, just so many surprises. So I knew that my job at that time, in the very beginning, was to make this transcription of every single document and every single page of the diary and the memoir. And also, my goal was to do photocopies of every single document, every single page that was in that package. And that's all I was going to do until I started transcribing. And she came to life. And I didn't get too far before I said, this woman needs a book. And that was my next 7 years. And what a joy, what a privilege. You can do research and you push yourself along, but when it feels as if it's a gift that's been given to you, it's a totally different experience. It's an energy that it's hard to describe, but it's real. It's real. But if we look at the letter, we see, dear Stanley and Eleanor, I got home Tuesday in time to listen to Eleanor's radio talk, and I enjoyed it very much. Now, Kunitz was in the Army at that point. He was 40 years old. He had been drafted, World War II. And I thought, he said in this book that she wrote it in 1951 and the war was over. Let's look a little bit more into that paragraph. And she talks about, let's go to the next paragraph. No, it's the same paragraph. Same day or earlier in the evening, I got a telegram that my brother Abe passed away. And the news was, see, that's Yetta. Let me get this book where I have transcribed it. I got a telegram that my brother Abe passed away. The news was not unexpected. I knew that he was very ill, yet it knocked me out and I was terribly upset that I could not go to the funeral. The Worcester City Hall has Abe's death record, his death certificate. He died in 1945. Also, the envelope that this letter was in had a very hard to read postmark 1945, not 1951. So these inconsistencies started to build up and piqued my curiosity for sure. This is the paragraph that is the most important. It starts because he said she wrote it in she wrote this memoir in a rest home after she had a stroke when she's in 1951. And she said, Stanley, when you asked me to write some of my memories, I did not know if you really meant it. I thought about it and wondered who would be interested enough to waste the time and read it, unless you could take out some of it like a chemist does, with all the tons of material used to extract an ounce of something worthwhile. Well, that doesn't make sense, according to Stanley's version of it. So I just kept up with it. That's what I decided I had to do. She says that later on, I scribbled a few pages as a very poorly made sample. I wanted to know if you think you could do something with it. And this is what really got me right away. I know you could add the collar and trimming. Now, she's using metaphors. And I knew that she was a seamstress. And I thought she's putting it into her writing. And I just was so taken with that. And as I started to write the book, I decided it would be creative nonfiction. I would put the transcriptions of her letters, her memoir, and her diary, word for word. I did not change a word, and build a biography around it. But I was able to get from her another gift. And that gift was metaphor of sewing. So I was able to weave, weave in a lot of sewing metaphors throughout the book. And that gave me great pleasure as a writer. It really did. And you know, when we're onto something as writers, it's just, you just feel there's something very special about this experience. So let's see what the next slide is. That is Yetta and Stanley and his second wife, Eleanor, who is the mother of Dr. Gretchen Kunitz. And that is probably the visit when he asked her to write her memoirs. And he says in this book that she wrote the memoir because she was feeling very sad that she wasn't doing anything in the rest home after her stroke. She couldn't, you know, she was bored. And that's not what it was at all, because he was in the Army, he was in Washington in the publicity department. He did a newsletter for the Army, but 3 of her 4 grandsons, which was very, very close to them, were in active service. She was worried sick, basically. So this took her mind off of it, and she felt that right away, as writing can do. When you are so low, if you try to write about it, it can bring you up and out. You can understand more, maybe, about what you're going through. And that worked for her. And it was a kind of a miracle for her at that point. So let's get the next slide. All right, how the book is organized is in 7 sections. Tarrytown, New York is where she was living with her great niece, Rosalind Leviton. And she was living in Tarrytown when she was writing this first letter that we just looked at, all right? Then the memoir gets into play, and that is the second chapter, the second time when she starts with her birth and goes to 1890 when she prepares to travel up and sail across the Atlantic to New York City. Chapter 3, New York Lower East Side, one of the best written. If you have not read it, it is one of the best written accounts of what it feels like to be an immigrant and making her way. Just give me a chance was her mantra. Just let me try. You had to really admire her right then and there. And then she stopped writing her memoir because of what had happened at the end of it. She did not want to write anymore, so I had to move into her marriage to Solomon Kunitz. And that goes from 1894, moved to Worcester, and to 1950, when toward the end of that time, her life became very unstable. Mount Vernon, New York, she's had a stroke. She's in a convalescent home. And chapter 6, I deal with the family ties that Kunitz felt and why he turned his back on his family, and he turned his back on Worcester. The afterword, however, brings forth what a relationship with a young couple who bought his boyhood home did for him. It was a miracle of connection that allowed him to reconnect with his roots. And he became one of the most prolific readers in the city of Worcester. And that's where my late husband and I started seeing him. Papers would announce Stanley Kunitz, native son, coming for a reading, famous poet. So we would go. And so we heard him read several times. So that is the story in the afterword. So it kind of brings the full circle around Yetta's story and how she ended and how Stanley carried on with the legacy that she left him and what he did with that. Thank you. This is one of the pages that I was working with in the memoir, and I just wanted you to see it because I could do 4 pages a day. That was my limit because the pages were like this. So difficult to read by any stretch, but I managed it. As I decoded it all, it was every bit was such a joy. It really was. So 81 pages of memoir, and that's just a sample for you to see what. But I'd like you to hear a little bit of the memoir. So let's just get to that. Yetta's writing about her father, Harry Jaspin. My father, Harry Jaspin, this is page 41. Thank you. My father, Harry Jaspin, said that he was a descendant of Spanish Jews from the 16th century. He and his ancestors were proud of their Spanish origin, so they took the surname of Jaspin. In Russian, it was Jaspin, which means I'm Spanish. That was a family story. Gretchen has had her DNA done, and she's only Ashkenazi. So this was a family story that Yetta passed on to Stanley, because he, in many of his interviews, would say we were of Sephardic Jewish heritage. He was a learned man who loved to give orders, and his orders were law. My mother was a good-natured, hardworking woman who was father's slave. In those days, all women were slaves to their husbands. Since I ever could remember, father was always in poor health because of an incident that happened before I was born. One of his businesses was to supply food and grain for the Russian army's forces. When the Polish-Lithuanian Revolution started, the Russians persecuted those who supported Poland, and the Poles did the same to those who supported Russia. The Poles had father on the list of Russian supporters. He knew that could mean death. He decided to go to Warsaw, where he knew two leaders of the rebels, Graf Radziwill and Graf Aganuzzi. He left mother at home with two small children. This was 2 years before she was born. It took weeks before he could get in touch with them. Finally, they promised him freedom if he would stop supplying the Russian army. They told him he could return home, and in case someone molested him, they gave him a letter signed by both that he was not to be troubled anymore. Father returned home late one evening, happy with what he had accomplished, and he told mother the story. The next morning, a group of rebels came and took father out of bed. They told him not to bother dressing because they were going to hang him. They had the rope. They walked him through the street to the river, which was not far. There was a tree where many innocent people were hanged by both Russians and Poles. Father, in his haste, forgot about the letter. I know, Yetta. But mother ran after him, crying and waving the letter. She reached them just in time to save father's life. How history repeats itself almost a century later. Europe suffers again, only in a crueler way and on a larger scale. She's writing this in 1945. Father was free, but ruined financially and broken in health. It took months before he could do anything. No one was sure what would happen from day to day. Isn't she a wonderful writer? So engaging and so full of details. Just a pleasure to discover her, to recover her, I suppose. Why don't we see what the next? This was another joyful occasion. This is Yetta's home in Lithuania. And one of the early visits to Princeton, I came across that photograph in one of the folders, and I thought, wow, it looks like an old village. There wasn't anything on the back. An old village photograph. That's pretty interesting. And look at how they're dressed. And anyway, I am transcribing her memoir, and I come to this. From the middle 1880s, there was large-scale immigration, especially of the Jewish people after the pogroms started in Russia. I scraped together the money needed for the voyage. Mother packed my trousseau into two large wicker baskets with locks. Every mother started a trousseau when her daughter was very young, perhaps from the age of 3. And some of us remember trousseaux. I don't think that people, yes. Do you do that anymore? I didn't think so. I haven't heard that concept even.
My grandma had a hope chest.
Your grandma, that's what we're talking about. Who did?
My mother.
Your mother had one. That's great. It consisted, this is what her hope chest or trousseau. It consisted of a feather bed and 3 large pillows. There were perhaps 70 pounds of pure white geese feathers. The stems of every feather were removed by hand. Then the feathers were mixed with down, which was also pure white. It takes years to collect 70 or more pounds of feathers, but it is done. I still use some pillows and had enough for my children when they were married. I know. There were dozens of cotton or linen hand-knitted stockings, but I could never use the stockings in this country. Trousseaus included all sorts of pure linen sheets, towels, pillowcases, hand-embroidered underwear, some charms for good luck, and hundreds of other things that I never had any use for. Mother had loads of copper and silver utensils, which were inherited from generation to generation. Some were sold in secret when hard times came, such as when my second sister was married after my father's death. But there were still plenty, so I took my share with me. Everything was packed in 2 baskets that weighed almost 300 pounds. It was a miracle that I had a home to leave behind. 2 days before my departure, a fire broke out 3 houses away and the whole street burned down. I almost lost my valuable trousseau in the fire. It did not take long to burn with all the straw roofs, dry timber, and no fire apparatus. Of course, all the men in town came and tried to put out the fire. Since the water had to be drawn from a well, 2 hours later, half the town was a heap of ashes. And with our recent experience with the fires, we certainly can imagine how that must have been. But our house with all the barns, because her father also stored the grain for the horses, and storehouses remained, but to be destroyed 50 years later by Hitler. I still have a picture of our house. When I transcribed this sentence, I remembered this picture. I still have a picture of our home taken by a nephew of mine who visited in 1928. So, I mean, these are the thrills that you say, look at the connection, and I'm holding it in my hand. It's beyond description sometimes, it really is. Let's see what the next picture is. So she gets to New York, and lucky Yetta, what had just been opened was the Educational Alliance in the early 1890s. It was in another location then. It was founded in 1889, but it moved to this building. And Yetta had a tremendous respect for education. And even though she wasn't educated, she went to pretty much elementary school, through elementary school. So she was right away enrolled. She enrolled herself when she got a job in Lower Manhattan, working in a factory that made embroidery, buttons, ribbons, but it was kind of how do you say it when it's seasonal? After Christmas, she knew she was going to be laid off, but she worked. She did a beautiful job. She brought work home but she also went to Henry Street School to begin to learn English. But she was kind of very honest about what she thought of the educational opportunities at that point. And she said, they're treating us like children. You know, we know 2 and 2 equals 4, and we know this basic stuff, but they're not treating us like adults. But it all changed because one Saturday afternoon, as I was walking on Grand Street, I decided to explore other streets. I came to 197 East Broadway and the newly erected building someone had told me about, the Educational Alliance. And by the way, it still exists and serves the immigrant population in Lower Manhattan. There was a sign telling about lectures in Jewish or English by Doctors Felix Adler and Henry Ferrara Mendes, and a list of classes for immigrants. I went inside to inquire, and they gave me the week's program. I was delighted to see all these free lectures and musical programs. But the question was, how could I make time to attend when I had to work overtime and do my night school homework? I simply did not know what to do. Should I give up night school or give up bringing work home? I needed the money and wanted to go to night school, no matter how little I had learned in the past 2 months. But I decided to try. I went home, ate my supper, and went back to the Educational Alliance. Dr. Felix Adler was scheduled to lecture. I came an hour early, a habit I still have. Whether it's to see a show or take a train, I always have to wait. Time seems so much longer when you really wait for something, but I've always been that way, and now I'm too old to change. I know I can wait for a train or a show or a lecture to start, but they would not wait for me. I cannot remember ever being late for any appointment or missing a train. So of course, to hear my first lecture, I came a whole hour early. I was impressed with the atmosphere. They had a library with books in Yiddish, Hebrew, Russian, and German. Young men and women were reading in a large room. The people as a whole were more to my liking. I went into the lecture room and saw it was almost filled, but in those days it made no difference. Back then I could hear well, even if I was sitting at the very end. Now I need to come early in order to get a front seat. Otherwise, I don't hear a word. Dr. Adler spoke of the opportunities and hardships that confronted the newcomer in a strange land. In the short time I had been there, I knew how true it was. Some people could never readjust themselves and find a way of life to fit in. If only more immigrants would look for places like the Educational Alliance to get this valuable advice, perhaps they could better themselves. Dr. Adler spoke for an hour, and I wished it could have lasted more. And the lectures they offered were philosophy, politics, ethics, social reform. So here's this young woman, this 23-year-old, absorbing all of this and being the person that she would become as an adult, coming from a small village in Lithuania, which had certainly a respect for education, and her brothers were educated, but she really was keen to learn as much as she could. So a lot of her attitudes were formed right there and lasted for her life, for her lifetime. Let's see what the next one is. So in 1893, she moves to Worcester, and probably, as I'm going to say in a moment, in an arranged marriage. And there's Solomon. And Solomon Kunitz was born. Now we shift away from Yetta's words. This is when I had to take over and build her biography around her memoir. Solomon Kunitz was born in 1865 and emigrated in 1887 from Odessa, Ukraine, which was then part of the Russian Empire. He settled in Providence, Rhode Island, where he worked at a gold paint company. In 1893, he traveled 45 miles north to Worcester and married Yetta Jaspin, a union possibly arranged by her brother Abe, who was working as a cutter in a Worcester wrapper factory. And a wrapper is a woman, it's a large garment that fits over your regular clothes, like a coat or a shawl or a house coat. If you're wearing, women used to wear house coats over their to do housework and cooking and so on. 26-year-old Yetta would have been viewed as a good match. She had 3 years of experience in New York garment trade and confidence that a business could prosper if she were given a chance to try. On July 27th, 1893, Yetta and Solomon married. Solomon Kunitz was destined for the front pages of Worcester's newspapers twice. He started a small women's clothing manufacturing shop at 83 Green Street. Soon he was able to expand and move into a factory on the corner of Winter and Harding Streets. By 1897, the Parisian wrapper manufacturing company was prospering, and Solomon was featured as one of 9 men and 1 woman in the business section of the Fitchburg Sentinel. He became a member of Brith Abraham and Sons of Benjamin, Jewish men's fraternal orders which adopted Masonic rituals. And if you know the poem 3 Floors, he refers to some of those pieces of clothing that he found in the attic, going through the trunk that he does in 3 Floors. It's a wonderful poem. The couple could not know that skeins of loss would unravel, tumble into their path, and throw them profoundly off balance. On January 26, 1895, Yetta gave birth to Harris, who was named after her father, and 8 months later, the boy died. I'm just going to go through some of these. Then Sarah is born, and she lived. But then Bessie was born, and she died at 5 months. The Hebrew word shakul translates into parents who lose children, and the Kunitzes absorbed that heartache, the heartache of that appellation. Yetta was pregnant 7 times, 6 live births and 1 stillborn. 4 of those children died under a year old. And it must have been heartbreaking. And then this happened on January 20th, 1899, the Worcester Spy's front page. In the extreme right-hand column, big loss, Parisian wrapper factory, badly gutted. The factory that was so successful burned down. There's a very complete description of that, which is here. A spy, Worcester Spy was a newspaper reporter, went to 54 Providence Street and woke Solomon Kunitz and his family. When told of the fire, he was, quote, greatly overcome. Kunitz told the reporter that his insurance policy worth $50,000 covered the, quote, building stock and machinery. Anticipating the busiest season of the year, new fabrics had been purchased, making the loss greater than the coverage. 3 months later, 3 months earlier, he had taken on 2 partners from Boston and made improvements to the factory, including $2,000 in the office area. You can imagine what that would be today. Kunitz stated, I had the best factory for the manufacture of wrappers in the country, with 225 machines of the latest design. At the present time, there have been about 300 girls employed there, with orders for between 50,000 and 60,000 ahead, all lost. A few things were retrieved and put into another shop nearby. So shortly thereafter, Yetta lost stillborn son, and he worked, let's see if we can see with the next slide. He worked at it says right in this article, let's see, it says a newsstand right near the tenement where he lived. It wasn't a tenement, it was a mixed-use building, a business, offices, and they lived on the 3rd floor. And if you know the poem Halley's Comet, it takes place on the roof of that 3rd floor. So he just, in fact, there was one, the year before, he's listed in the city directory and unemployed. So struggling. He's got 2 little girls and his wife is pregnant again for the 7th time. And this was on the front page, June 2nd, 1905. He walked to Elm Park, a little over a mile away from the neighborhood. He went to a water fountain and took the cup that was dangling, and he filled it with carbolic acid. He had the bottle on him, filled it and drank it, staggered into the bushes near the lake. And I think we can see, yeah, this is Elm Park. And he staggered to the bushes that were there. And this is taken the year that it happened. The Historical Museum had this photograph taken the same year. And we know all this about how he died, even to the posture of his body and what was happening, because he was not a known face in that neighborhood. And the caretaker of the park noted, and a young boy went to assist him and saw him die. So you can imagine the impact in the community. the impact on Yetta. 8 weeks later, she delivered Stanley Kunitz, her son. Let's see what the next, well, 5 years go by, 1910, Yetta remarries. She married a man who was 10 years her senior, who was an immigrant from Lithuania, same town, it's the same area that she came from. And I do see from my watch that we can leave Yetta in happier times, because these 10 years of her life, even though they went bankrupt a few times, income tax, federal tax came in during that decade. They struggled, but they managed to make quite a nice living. And she married Mark Dine, the extreme right. There is Sarah, who married shortly after they moved into this new house that they had built. And there's Sophia, and there's Yetta, and that's her brother Abe. And there's Stanley Kunitz at about probably 10 years old. Yeah. So we do have to stop now, because I think that if we have comments or questions, it might be good to kind of take a break now. You think that's a good idea,
I think
Mary?
that's a good idea.
Yeah.